بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. As we mentioned last week, إخوتي في الله, we're going to begin inshallah to deal with the book by Imam At-Thahabi, Kitab Al-Kaba'ir, rahimahullah ta'ala. And instead of reading the introduction, and every book in Al-Islam has an introduction. This was the way that the ulama of Al-Islam used to write their books, and this is the way that they continue to write their books, where they will have a muqaddamah. And the introduction is important whether it's in Arabic or in English, because the introduction is going to let you know what is the minhaj of that person who wrote the book. The introduction is going to shed light on the contents of the book, and based upon the introduction you can criticize the author. Al-Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala, he put upon himself a condition that he would only put in his book the ahadith that are authentic. Once a person knows that was his goal and his objective, if he were to find a hadith inside al-Bukhari that's not authentic, now he can criticize al-Imam al-Bukhari. The weak hadith that are in Sahih Bukhari, for an example, they're there for a reason, so it may not be necessarily just and fair to criticize him until you know what is and what was the minhaj of that author. So every book in Al-Islam, it has an introduction to it to shed light on the issue that's going to be dealt with. Instead of reading the introduction of Al-Imam At-Thahabi rahimahullah ta'ala in this book, where he gave each and every one of us nasiha, he's given us advice, the ummah of Al-Islam advice, and he gathered for us a book that details the issues of the kaba'ir. So instead of dealing with reading it word for word, we have made the talkhis of what he did. He talked about 4 primary issues in the introduction. The first issue that he spoke about was he wanted to prove this concept of dividing the dhunub and the ma'asi into kaba'ir and sagha'ir is from al-Islam. He wanted to prove that. There are certain people from the people of al-ahwa who follow their desires, who said there are no kaba'ir and there are no sagha'ir. All of the sins are kaba'ir. People who had good intention from the Ahlul Tasawwuf, they had good intention. They said if you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's a kabira. Al-Imam At-Thahabi brought that this distinction, it is from al-Islam. To say that this sin is a kabira and to say that this is a saghira, he wanted to prove that in the introduction. So he brought some of the ayat of the Quran and the ahadith to prove that, like the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in tajtanibu kaba'ir ma tunhawna anhu nukaffir ankum sayyi'atikum wa nudkhilukum mudkhala karima. If you people stay away from the major sins that you have been prohibited from, Allah will give you the kafara. He will make the takfir. He will expiate your other sins. The smaller sins that you do, Allah will wipe them away, and He will cause you to enter into an honorable entering. So Allah Ta'ala in this ayat, He called the sins kaba'ir. If you stay away from the kaba'ir. In another ayat, as Imam At-Thahabi brought, he said that Allah Azza wa Jalla said, الَّذِينَ يَجْتَنِبُوا كَبَائِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَالْفَوَاحِشِ إِلَّا اللَّمَمِ. Those people who avoid and they stay away from the major sins and from the fawahish, except they fall into the smaller sins, they fall into the lamam, those things that the people can't help. They're the less significant dhunub and ma'asi. For those people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord, He is forgiven. And we have too many ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that also established this point, where he told us sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wasallam, as-salawatul khams wal jum'atu ila al-jum'a wa ramadan ila ramadan mukaffiratun lima baynahunna idha ijtunibat al-kaba'ir. The 5 prayers that you make, and the Jummah prayer to the next Jummah prayer, and one Ramadan to the next Ramadan, is an expiation if you stay away from the major sins. So if you fall into the small sins, like looking at a woman inadvertently, you didn't mean to do it, you looked and it was there, but you made istighfar, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you by making the prayers. He'll forgive you by making hajj. He'll forgive you because you fast. So the point of all of this is, in the introduction of Al-Imam At-Thahabi, the first point he dealt with is this concept: there are kaba'ir and there are sagha'ir. And it's not acceptable for the Muslim to come and to say every sin is a kabira after Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They both have established that there are kaba'ir and there are sagha'ir. The second issue that Al-Imam At-Thahabi dealt with in the introduction is, how many kaba'ir are there? And the scholars of Al-Islam have ikhtilaf concerning this issue, and he brought some of their statements of ikhtilaf. Some of the scholars said that there were only 7 major sins, and they took the authentic hadith of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, that's in Bukhari and Muslim, in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam qal, ijtanibu as-sab' al-mubiqat. Stay away from and avoid the 7 sins that will destroy you. You're going to fall into sins, wala bud. Stay away from those 7 sins that if you're falling into them, they will destroy you. He said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ash-shirku billah wal qatl, killing someone, making shirk, killing someone, was sihr, and performing magic, a common practice in our community. Putting magic upon people and getting the magic off of you by using magic. The mother has a problem with the daughter-in-law, so she puts magic on the daughter-in-law. Stay away from the 7 major sins: ash-shirk billah, killing people, magic, wa aklu riba, and devouring riba, taking riba, wa aklu mal al-yatim, and devouring the money of the orphan. You've been left and entrusted to take care of the affairs of the orphan. Don't devour his money. وَالتَّوَلِّي يَوْمَ الزَّحْفِ, and running away on the day of jihad from the battlefield. Not to mention denying jihad altogether, because we have a group of people who go overboard and everything with them is jihad, jihad, jihad. You have the other extreme of the Muslims who come and say, no, the only jihad is jihad the nafs. La, there's jihad where we kill the kuffar, but it has fiqh to it, and it has religion to it, and it has knowledge to it. So the 6th thing is not running away from the battlefield. And the final thing, 7th one, is ramyul muhsinat al-mu'minat al-ghafilat, that you would accuse a virtuous Muslim believing woman of making zina when she is innocent. Stay away from those 7 major sins. So because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that they were 7, some of the scholars took that position. Al-Imam At-Thahabi, ikhwan, he said no. He felt that the correct position is that they were more than that, and he used the authentic statement and understanding of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, who said, hiya aqrab ila as-sab'in mimma hiya ila as-sab'. Abdullah ibn Abbas said the major sins are closer to 70 than they are to 7. They're closer to 70 than they are to 7. Concerning Abdullah ibn Abbas's statement, there are 2 points very quickly we have to mention. The first point is, there are a hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned other than nub and ma'asi, and he described them as being from the kaba'ir that are not in the 7 ones that were mentioned in the hadith of Abu Hurairah. He asked his companions, Ala unabbi'ukum bi akbar al-kaba'ir, should I not tell you people what's the greatest kabira is, the most severest sin? They said, what is it, Ya Rasulullah? He said, al-ishraku billah, that you make shirk with Allah, wa uququl walidain, and that you are disobedient to your parents. So this wasn't mentioned in the hadith of Abu Hurairah. And he was reclining, and then he sat up, and he became straight, and he said, Allah wa qawlu zur, And he kept saying it over and over. And the third thing is that you will give false testimony. You didn't see what happened, you don't know what happened, and so when you come, you start to say this happened and you didn't even know. That's false testimony. So in this hadith, two other sins were mentioned that were not in the first hadith of Abu Huraira. So it goes to show us more than 7. Abdullah bin Abbas said it's closer to 70. As it relates to the second issue, it is the number that Abdullah bin Abbas says, 70. He doesn't mean 70 here, wallahu alam. Whenever you find in the Arabs, in their language, in the Quran, in the authentic Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if the number 70 is used, usually it is a figurative number to denote a lot. It doesn't mean 70 specifically. That was the way that the Arabs used to speak, and they would say 70 in order to give an indication that it's a large number. He used to say to his companion sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Inni la astaghfirullah wa utubu ilayhi fil yawm akthar min 70 marra." I make istighfar and I make tawbah to Allah in one day more than 70 times. More than 70 times. So that doesn't mean that when you read that hadith, you should make istighfar until you get to 70 and 71. You should go beyond that. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was using that as a figurative of speech. As Allah said to him in the Quran, "In tastaghfir lahum aw la tastaghfir lahum, lan yaghfir Allahu lahum. Wa in tastaghfir lahum 70 marra, lan yaghfir Allahu lahum." If you seek their forgiveness, if you ask Allah to forgive them, those munafiqeen, or you don't ask them to forgive them, even if you ask them 70 times, Allah is not going to forgive them. So the statement of Abdullah ibn Abbas is going to show that the kaba'ir are kathira. There are many. The third point, extremely important point, dealing with the major sins, is he talked about how do we know that a sin is a major sin, and how do we know that a sin is a minor sin. He spoke about that issue, and he mentioned there are two things that will let you know that the sin is a major sin. In this deen of al-Islam, if you want to know whether or not the sin is a major sin or a minor sin, then there are three things that you need to know. Al-Imam At-Thahabi mentioned two in the introduction. Number one, if the sin has a wa'id connected to it in the dunya or the akhirah. If the sin that is being done has been described in the Quran or the Sunnah as being something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to punish the person for it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will curse the person for it. Allah will put him in the hellfire. Allah won't look at them. Allah won't purify them. They're from the brothers of the shayateen. They're similar to the kuffar. They will be far from the rahmah of Allah. They won't go into Jannah. And that is a kabira from the kaba'ir. If it has a wa'id. The second thing that Imam At-Thahabi brought was if there is a had in the dunya for that sin. If you get your hand chopped off for stealing, stealing is a major sin. If you get flogged for drinking khamr, khamr is a major sin. If you get locked up for being a deviant, as the ulama of al-Islam used to have deviants locked up in the prison, it's a major sin. So if it has a had, it's a major sin. Finally, the third thing, Al-Imam At-Thahabi didn't bring this, but it's understood by default, and that is, if there is a nas, Allah or His Messenger said, this is a major sin. Should I not tell you what the major sins are? Yes, Rasulullah, what are they? He said, shirk, so you know it's a major sin. That's the third point that Imam At-Thahabi mentioned. Fourth and final point that he mentioned in the introduction before we go into the first kabira is that he wanted to explain how the kaba'ir, even though they are kaba'ir, they're major sins, the kaba'ir, they have levels and degrees, and they're not all on the same level. A shirk is a kabira from the kaba'ir, but making shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not the same as killing someone. Making shirk is greater. killing someone is a kabira from the kaba'ir, but it is not the same as the qawl al-zur, bearing false witness. So he wanted to explain that the kaba'ir are of different levels, and those are the 4 points that he dealt with in the introduction. And to sum up the introduction, I would like to say, when we make the distinction between the kaba'ir and the sagha'ir in al-Islam, that doesn't mean that a person looks at the small sins of the sagha'ir as being small. Because if the small sins continue to gather up on a person, they will and they could burn him. If the small sins that he does them, they can turn into the kaba'ir. Many times they are the prelude to the kaba'ir.